I built myself. Nobody gave me anything. Those were the words my son said on national television, while I sat alone at my kitchen table holding the same cracked coffee mug I'd been using since 1998. I remember staring at the screen, waiting for him to laugh and say he was joking, waiting for him to mention the woman who cleaned office bathrooms for nearly 3 decades, so he could wear those expensive suits and sit under studio lights pretending he came from nowhere. But Ethan just smiled. Calm, confident, polished. The audience applauded him while I looked down at my hands and noticed the bleach stains still buried deep around my fingernails after all these years. I'm Margaret Hale. I'm 68 years old, and for 27 years, my life revolved around making sure my son never felt poor. The interview was happening in New York City, but I was sitting in my tiny duplex outside Dayton, Ohio, with a frozen chicken pot pie cooling on the counter because I'd stopped eating the moment I heard the host ask him the question. "Who inspired your success?" she said with a warm smile. Ethan leaned back in his chair like he belonged there. Like he had always belonged there. "Honestly," he said, adjusting the cuff of a watch that probably cost more than my first car, "I've always believed nobody owes you anything. Everything I have, I built myself." The crowd laughed softly in admiration. The host nodded like he'd said something profound. And then came the sentence that hollowed me out completely. Nobody gave me a thing. I didn't cry. That's the strange part. People think heartbreak always arrives loudly, but sometimes it enters a room quietly and sits beside you like an old friend. I just reached for the remote and lowered the volume. Outside my kitchen window, rain slid slowly down the glass. The old refrigerator hummed behind me. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and then stopped. Life kept moving like nothing had happened at all. But inside me, something shifted permanently. Because Ethan hadn't forgotten what I did for him. That would have hurt less. No, my son had rewritten the story entirely. He had taken every overnight shift, every missed meal, every unpaid medical bill, every pair of worn-out sneakers I kept gluing back together instead of replacing, and erased them with one sentence. Self-made. I looked around my kitchen at the small life I still lived. The faded linoleum floor. The coupon drawer beside the microwave. The electric bill folded neatly under a magnet shaped like Florida that Ethan bought me when he was 16. Back then he used to hug me before school and whisper, "One day I'll take care of you, Mom." I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. On television, the host asked Ethan what kept him motivated during difficult times. He smiled again, but this time I noticed something cold in it. "Fear," he said. I knew if I failed, there was nobody coming to save me. I turned the television off after that. The silence inside my kitchen felt enormous. I sat there for a long time staring at my reflection in the dark screen, and for the first time in 27 years, I stopped feeling proud of my son. The next morning, I woke up at 4:30 out of habit even though I had nowhere to be. For 27 years my body had learned how to rise before the sun without needing an alarm. I lay there in the dark for a moment listening to the pipes rattle inside the walls of my duplex, while the old ceiling fan clicked softly above me. My knees ached before my feet even touched the floor. That was normal now. Some mornings my hands were so stiff I had to run warm water over them before I could close my fingers properly. I shuffled into the kitchen wearing the same gray robe I had owned for almost 10 years and started the coffee maker. The smell filled the room slowly, warm and familiar. There was comfort in routines when people disappointed you. I stood by the sink staring out at the parking lot while the machine dripped. A delivery truck rolled past on the wet street. Somewhere nearby, a garbage can lid slammed shut. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. But my mind kept replaying Ethan's voice from the night before. Nobody gave me anything. I opened the freezer and pulled out a loaf of bread because it was cheaper to freeze it before mold got to it. While the toast browned, I found myself thinking about the apartment we lived in after my husband died. 1 bedroom. No air conditioning. The kind of place where summer heat clung to the walls even after midnight. Ethan was 14 then. Skinny. Quiet. Too smart for his own good. I used to leave notes beside his cereal before my morning shift at the diner. Good luck on your math test. Dinner is in the fridge. I love you more than anything. Little things. Mothers believe little things matter. Back then I worked 3 jobs. Breakfast shift at Mel's Diner from 5 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon. Cleaning offices downtown from 6 until 10 at night. Laundry service on weekends whenever somebody called in sick. There were days I barely sat down except on the bus ride between jobs. I still remember one winter night when the bus heater broke during a snowstorm. I sat there in wet shoes for 40 minutes clutching a bag of canned soup and discount medicine while my fingers went numb from cold. But Ethan needed antibiotics that week, and medicine came before comfort. Always. There was never enough money for both. I used to keep a coffee can above the refrigerator labeled college. Every dollar bill I could spare went into that can. Tips from the diner. Birthday money from my sister. Coins I found beneath couch cushions while cleaning rich people's homes. Sometimes after midnight I would dump the whole thing onto the kitchen table and count it slowly while Ethan slept down the hall. Tuition brochures sat beside unpaid utility bills. Hope and fear side by side. Ethan never saw the worst parts of it because I made sure he did not. I packed his lunches even when mine was just coffee. I smiled through exhaustion because children notice more than adults think they do. The first time Ethan got accepted into a business program at Ohio State, he cried in the parking lot outside our apartment building. "You did this, Mom," he told me, hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. I remember laughing and saying, "No, sweetheart. You did." I meant it then. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe if you spend your whole life protecting somebody from struggle, eventually they start believing they were never carried at all. The first time Ethan looked embarrassed by me, we were standing inside a grocery store checkout line when he was 19 years old. I remember it clearly because I had just finished a double shift and still smelled faintly like fryer grease from the diner. My sneakers were damp from the rain outside, and I had exactly $43 left until payday. Ethan had come home from college for the weekend wearing a navy sweater and carrying himself differently somehow. Straighter. Sharper. Like the world had started teaching him new rules while I stayed behind learning the old ones. The cashier smiled politely and asked how his semester was going. Before I could say anything, Ethan answered in a voice I barely recognized. Smooth. Controlled. Colder than usual. "It is going great," he said. Not it's. It is. He had started speaking differently. Cleaner. More polished. I noticed it immediately because I used to help him practice spelling words at our kitchen table, while he still pronounced library like library. The cashier looked at me and said, "You must be proud." I smiled before Ethan could answer. "I am," I said softly. "This boy worked so hard." Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Mom," he muttered under his breath. "Do not call me boy." It was such a small thing. So small another person might not even remember it years later. But mothers remember tone. We remember pauses. We remember the exact moment warmth disappears from somebody's voice. After that, little things began changing one by one. Ethan stopped asking for my recipes because his girlfriend Vanessa preferred healthier food. He stopped bringing college friends to the apartment because parking downtown was inconvenient. He started correcting my grammar during conversations. Quietly at first. Then more openly. "You mean fewer, not less," he would say while scrolling through his phone. "That restaurant is pronounced differently. Actually, successful investors do not really dress like that anymore." Each sentence landed softly enough to deny cruelty but hard enough to bruise anyway. By the time he turned 30, Ethan had built a successful finance company in Chicago and moved into a high-rise apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. The first time I visited, Vanessa greeted me with a smile too careful to be genuine. She was beautiful in the polished way magazine women are beautiful. Cream sweater. White kitchen counters without a single stain. Candles that smelled expensive. She hugged me lightly like she was afraid my life might rub off on her clothes. During dinner, Ethan talked about venture capital firms and private investors while I nodded along pretending I understood more than I did. At one point Vanessa laughed softly and said, "Ethan has worked so hard to reinvent himself." Reinvent. The word sat strangely in my chest. Like she believed the boy from Dayton had been something shameful that needed correcting. Later that evening, Ethan pulled me aside before meeting some colleagues at a rooftop restaurant. He adjusted his tie while speaking, careful not to meet my eyes directly. "Mom," he said casually, "tonight is kind of important, so maybe do not bring up the trailer park years if you meet anybody." I stared at him for a moment because I honestly thought I misunderstood. What is wrong with where we lived? I asked quietly. Ethan sighed the way tired people sigh at difficult children. Nothing is wrong with it. I just do not want people getting the wrong impression. The wrong impression. As though surviving poverty honorably was somehow more embarrassing than forgetting the woman who helped you survive it. I remember standing alone in his spotless guest bathroom after he left, staring at my reflection beneath bright white lights. My hair looked too gray. My coat suddenly looked too cheap. For the first time in my life, I felt poor in front of my own son. About a year after that conversation in Chicago, Ethan invited me to a company gala downtown. He sounded distracted on the phone when he mentioned it, like the invitation had come from obligation instead of excitement. It is a formal event, he warned me. A lot of investors will be there. I told him I understood even though I had never attended anything formal in my life beyond church weddings and funeral services. For 2 weeks I worried about what to wear. Finally bought a dark blue dress from a clearance rack at JCPenney, because the saleswoman told me the color looked elegant with silver hair. I spent almost an hour trying to smooth the wrinkles from the fabric using steam from my shower, because I could not afford dry cleaning that month. The gala was held inside a glass hotel ballroom overlooking the Chicago River. Everything sparkled. Crystal chandeliers. Gold-trimmed tables. Women balancing champagne glasses while laughing softly behind polished smiles. I remember standing near the entrance clutching my handbag too tightly, because suddenly I felt 68 instead of invisible. Ethan spotted me across the room and walked over quickly, his expression tense for reasons I did not yet understand. "Mom, you made it," he said, kissing my cheek without really looking at me. His tuxedo fit perfectly. His hair was shorter than usual, expensive looking, successful looking. Vanessa appeared beside him moments later in a silver gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Margaret," she said brightly, "you look lovely." But her eyes moved over me too quickly, scanning instead of seeing. Throughout the evening I noticed Ethan introducing everyone with confidence except me. "This is Daniel, one of our lead investors. That is Rebecca from the New York office. You should meet the venture capital team from Seattle." Then when somebody asked about me, his voice changed slightly. Softer. Less certain. "Oh, this is my mother." Just that. My mother. Not the woman who worked herself sick to put him through college. Not the woman who skipped heat one winter so tuition checks would clear on time. Just my mother, spoken like a detail too inconvenient to expand upon. At one point I stood alone beside the dessert table listening to 2 younger employees speak quietly behind me. "I thought his family came from money," one of them whispered. "Same," the other replied. "He does not really talk about them much." I should have walked away then, but something rooted me in place. A few minutes later Ethan joined a group of executives nearby, while Vanessa rested her hand lightly against his arm. Somebody made a joke about humble beginnings and Ethan laughed politely before saying, "You learn pretty quickly that success means leaving certain things behind." I do not think he realized I heard him, or maybe he did. That was the night I understood something painful about shame. It rarely arrives all at once. It builds slowly in tiny moments until eventually you recognize it sitting across from you, wearing your child's face. Later that evening a photographer gathered family members for pictures near the ballroom windows. Vanessa adjusted Ethan's jacket carefully while the skyline glowed behind them. I stepped forward automatically, but the photographer smiled apologetically and said, "Actually, we are just doing immediate household family first." Immediate household family. The words landed gently, but they still landed. I stepped back without arguing. Ethan glanced toward me for half a second. Just half a second. Then he turned back toward the camera and smiled. 3 days after the television interview aired, my phone rang while I was folding towels in the laundry room downstairs. I almost ignored it because most calls these days were either spam or reminders about prescription refills I could not always afford on time. But something made me answer. "Margaret Hale?" a man asked politely. His voice sounded young. Nervous. "Yes." There was a brief pause before he continued. "My name is Colin Mercer. I work in television production. I was part of the team that filmed Ethan's interview last week." I sat down slowly on the edge of the washing machine without fully understanding why my chest suddenly felt tight. "All right," I said carefully. The machine beside me hummed loudly during the silence that followed. I probably should not be calling you, he admitted quietly. But after seeing the final broadcast, I felt uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. Such a small word for the kind of damage people do to each other. I gripped the towel tighter in my lap. What do you mean? Another pause. Then papers rustling somewhere in the background. There was a portion edited out before airing, he said. A section where Ethan originally talked about you. I closed my eyes for a moment because suddenly I did not know whether I wanted to hear the rest. Part of me still hoped there had been some misunderstanding, some context I had missed. Colin lowered his voice slightly. He spoke about how hard you worked while he was growing up. Cleaning offices. Working multiple jobs. He got emotional, actually. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Then why was it removed? I asked. This time the silence lasted longer. Long enough to hurt. Because Ethan asked us to cut it. The washing machine clicked loudly into another cycle. Somewhere upstairs a neighbor's television echoed faintly through thin apartment walls. Life continued moving around me while I sat frozen beside a basket of clean towels. He said the story did not fit the brand he was building, Colin explained carefully. Those were his exact words. Brand. I stared down at my hands again. Dry skin. Faded veins. The wedding ring I still wore even after 15 years alone. 27 years of sacrifice reduced to something inconvenient for a marketing strategy. Colin sounded guilty now. I should not be involved in this, but I thought you deserved to know. Before hanging up, he asked if I wanted the raw interview footage. At first I almost said no because there are some wounds people sense before they see them clearly. But curiosity is a painful thing. Especially for mothers. That evening I sat alone in my living room with my reading glasses low on my nose and opened the file Colin sent. Ethan appeared on the screen wearing the same expensive suit from the interview. Relaxed. Charming. Successful. At first everything looked identical to the version broadcast on television. Then came the missing section. The host asked him who inspired his work ethic. Ethan laughed softly and looked down for a second before answering. Honestly? My mother. My breath caught immediately. She worked harder than anybody I have ever known, he continued. When I was a kid, she cleaned office buildings at night after working diner shifts all day. I remember pretending to sleep on the couch sometimes so she would not know I heard her crying in the kitchen over bills. I pressed my hand against my mouth because for one terrible moment I felt relief. Relief so sharp it almost hurt worse than the betrayal itself. But then Ethan shifted in his chair and gave a small awkward laugh. Actually, he said, glancing toward somebody off camera, maybe we should leave that part out. It sounds too depressing. Somebody behind the camera chuckled politely. Ethan smiled again. I am trying to build more of a self-made narrative. Narrative. Not truth. Narrative. I stopped the video there because suddenly the room felt too quiet to breathe in. After watching the interview footage, I stopped calling Ethan first. It sounds small when I say it out loud, but mothers build entire relationships out of small things. For years I had been the one remembering birthdays before sunrise, mailing Christmas cards early so they arrived on time, checking weather reports in Chicago just to remind Ethan to carry an umbrella. I sent soup recipes when he sounded tired on the phone. I mailed handwritten notes before every major business presentation because I knew he still kept them in his desk drawer whether Vanessa approved of sentimental things or not. I had spent decades quietly holding together pieces of his life he barely noticed anymore. Then one morning I simply stopped. No morning texts. No checking whether he had landed safely after flights. No mailing grocery store coupons clipped from newspapers. Silence can feel strange after a lifetime of service. At first Ethan did not notice. Successful people are often too busy being admired to recognize absence immediately. But after about 2 weeks, the calls started coming more frequently. Hey Mom, did you get the flowers we sent? He asked one evening while I stirred canned soup on the stove. I did, I answered politely. They were lovely. There was a pause because usually I would continue the conversation for him. Ask about work. Ask about Vanessa. Ask whether he was eating enough vegetables. This time I simply waited. Everything okay? He finally asked. Of course, I said softly. Why wouldn't it be? Another silence followed. I could almost hear his confusion through the phone. Ethan had spent so many years depending on unconditional support that he no longer recognized it as labor. To him, love had become something automatic, like electricity in a wall, always there until suddenly it is not. A month later, Vanessa called asking whether I could fly to Chicago for a long weekend because their nanny had quit unexpectedly. In the past, I would have rearranged doctor appointments without hesitation just to help them. I used to pack overnight bags with excitement because despite everything, being needed still felt close to being loved. But this time I looked around my quiet kitchen before answering. "I do not think I can," I said gently. Vanessa sounded surprised. "Oh, is something wrong?" I glanced toward the unpaid electric bill sitting beneath the fruit bowl. "No," I replied. "I am just tired lately." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time feeling strangely hollow. Not guilty exactly, just aware. A few days later, Ethan called again while I was folding laundry. "Vanessa said you sounded upset with us," he said carefully. "I am not upset." "Then why are you acting so distant?" I folded one of my old towels slowly before answering. "I think maybe you finally succeeded without me." The line went quiet immediately. "Mom," Ethan said after a moment, laughing awkwardly. "What is that supposed to mean?" I could picture him standing inside some spotless office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, expensive watch gleaming beneath fluorescent lights. Meanwhile, I was standing beside a card table covered in neatly folded towels from Walmart. Two completely different worlds connected only by history. "Nothing," I said softly. "Just something I realized recently." That night I heated leftovers for dinner and ate alone beside the kitchen window while rain tapped softly against the glass. For years I had believed motherhood meant giving endlessly without expecting acknowledgement in return. Maybe that is true. But there is something deeply painful about discovering your sacrifices did not disappear naturally over time. They were edited out deliberately, removed carefully so somebody else could tell a cleaner story about themselves. And somehow that hurt far more than poverty ever did. 2 months after the interview aired, Ethan appeared on the cover of a business magazine holding his arms crossed confidently beneath the headline, "The Man Who Built Himself." I noticed the magazine while standing in line at a pharmacy waiting to refill my blood pressure medication. His smile covered almost the entire front page. Clean suit, expensive haircut, bright studio lighting designed to make successful people look untouchable. I stared at the cover so long the cashier finally asked whether I wanted to buy it. I told her no, even though my chest felt strangely tight walking away from it. That same afternoon Vanessa called, sounding unusually cheerful. "Margaret, exciting news," she said brightly. "The magazine is doing a feature spread at the Penthouse next weekend. Some photographers and reporters are coming by for family shots." Family shots. The phrase landed awkwardly after everything that had happened. "That sounds lovely," I answered carefully. Vanessa hesitated before continuing. "There is just one tiny thing. The editor really wants the story to focus on Ethan's entrepreneurial journey. So maybe avoid talking too much about the harder years growing up." I stayed quiet. She rushed forward quickly, filling the silence. "You know how media works. They like clean narratives, inspirational stories. We do not want the article feeling sad or overly focused on struggle. Clean narratives." There were those words again. Like my life had become clutter somebody needed to tidy away before guests arrived. "I understand," I said softly. Vanessa laughed with relief. "Perfect. Oh, and maybe do not mention the cleaning jobs either. The branding team thinks it conflicts with Ethan's luxury finance image." Branding team. Luxury image. I stood there in my small kitchen staring at a crack running through the wallpaper beside the refrigerator while Vanessa continued discussing photographers and floral arrangements as casually as somebody planning a brunch. By the time she finished talking, I realized something painful. They were not simply embarrassed by poverty. They were embarrassed by the evidence that somebody else helped Ethan survive it. That weekend I traveled to Chicago anyway because part of motherhood is continuing to show up long after you should probably stop. The penthouse looked even larger than I remembered. Fresh white roses lined the marble kitchen island. Assistants moved quietly through the apartment carrying garment bags and lighting equipment. Everything smelled expensive and artificial at the same time. Ethan greeted me with distracted affection before immediately returning to a conversation with the photographer. Vanessa handed me sparkling water and smiled tightly. The editor may ask you a few questions, she warned gently. Just keep things uplifting. Uplifting. As though truth itself had become inappropriate. During the shoot, I watched Ethan laugh effortlessly beside floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, while reporters scribbled notes admiring his discipline and ambition. One young journalist finally approached me with a warm smile. "You must be incredibly proud," she said. "What was Ethan like growing up?" Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared beside us almost instantly. "Oh, Ethan has always been independent," she interrupted smoothly. "Even as a child he hated relying on anyone." The journalist nodded approvingly and wrote something down. I looked toward Ethan across the room. For one brief second our eyes met. He knew exactly what Vanessa was doing, and he allowed it. Not because he hated me. Somehow that would have been easier. No, Ethan simply preferred the version of himself that existed without my fingerprints on it. Later that evening after the photographers left, I stood alone in the guest bedroom holding the magazine mock-up they had left on the dresser. Beneath Ethan's photograph was a single sentence in bold print. "Success belongs to those willing to leave the past behind." I read it twice before setting the magazine down very carefully. Then I looked at my reflection in the dark bedroom window and quietly realized I had spent years protecting a story that was slowly erasing me from it. 3 weeks after the magazine feature came out, I received another phone call while watering the dying fern outside my kitchen window. This time it was a woman named Diane Keller from a daytime television program based in New York. Her voice sounded warm in a way that immediately made me suspicious because warm voices often arrive carrying dangerous opportunities. "Mrs. Hale," she said carefully, "we are producing a special episode about the unseen people behind successful public figures. One of our producers came across Ethan's interview, and your story stayed with us." I stayed quiet, listening to water drip slowly from the plant leaves onto the sink below. Diane continued gently, "We would love to invite you onto the program to talk about your life and the sacrifices you made as a single mother." My first instinct was to refuse. I had spent my entire adult life avoiding attention. Quiet women survive by becoming useful, not visible. Besides, the idea of sitting under bright studio lights discussing personal pain with strangers made my stomach tighten. But then I remembered Ethan laughing softly during that edited interview. "Let us cut that part." As though my life had become unnecessary footage. Diane must have sensed my hesitation because her voice softened further. "You would not need to attack anyone," she assured me. "We are interested in your story, not scandal." That sentence stayed with me all night. Your story. Not Ethan's version of it. Mine. For days later I found myself sitting inside a small television makeup room in Manhattan, while somebody powdered my face beneath bright mirrors lined with glowing bulbs. I felt completely out of place. The chair smelled faintly like hairspray and coffee. Outside the hallway buzzed with hurried footsteps and distant studio music. I kept smoothing invisible wrinkles from my navy blouse because nervous hands need somewhere to go. A young assistant offered me bottled water twice before realizing I was too anxious to drink it. When they finally led me onto the stage, the audience applauded politely. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cruel. Just ordinary people smiling kindly at an older woman walking carefully in sensible shoes beneath television lights. Diane greeted me warmly before the interview began. "Margaret," she asked softly once the cameras rolled, "what was the hardest part about raising a child alone?" I looked down at my hands for a second before answering because suddenly I could see every version of myself at once. 29 years old counting quarters for groceries. 42 years old scrubbing office floors after midnight. 68 years old sitting beneath studio lights trying to understand how love becomes shame inside certain people. "The hardest part," I said quietly, "was making sure my son never felt the weight I was carrying." The audience fell completely silent. Diane asked gentle questions after that, and I answered honestly. Not angrily. Just honestly. I talked about bus rides before dawn and heating canned soup after double shifts because there was no time to cook properly. I talked about keeping the apartment warm by baking bread during winter because turning up the heat cost too much. At one point Diane asked whether I regretted sacrificing so much. I thought about Ethan standing proudly beneath magazine headlines claiming independence while carefully erasing every trace of the woman who helped him survive long enough to become successful. Then I shook my head slowly. No, I answered. I regret teaching him that love is supposed to leave no evidence. Somewhere in the audience a woman quietly wiped tears from her eyes. I noticed because for the first time in years, somebody was finally listening to the whole story instead of the polished version edited down to fit somebody else's image. And strangely enough, sitting there beneath those bright lights, I did not feel invisible anymore. The interview aired on a Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday morning, clips of it were everywhere online. People shared short videos of me talking about double shifts and bus rides before sunrise while soft piano music played beneath captions about motherhood and sacrifice. Thousands of strangers commented things like she deserved better, and this woman built his future. I did not know how to react to any of it. My life had always been small and quiet. Suddenly people from places I had never visited were discussing my pain over morning coffee. Meanwhile, Ethan's company released a carefully worded statement about respecting family privacy. Investors started asking questions. Business. Podcasts debated authenticity and personal branding. Somebody even posted side-by-side clips comparing Ethan's self-made interview with my television appearance. The internet can smell contradiction faster than bloodhounds smell rain. Ethan called me 6 times in one day after the episode aired. I let every call go to voicemail. Not to punish him. I was simply tired. Truly tired for the first time in years. Tired of protecting somebody who viewed my sacrifices as inconvenient details to be hidden from public view. Vanessa finally left a message late Thursday evening. Her voice sounded strained beneath forced politeness. Margaret, this situation has gotten out of control. Ethan is under enormous pressure right now. People are twisting the story unfairly. Twisting. Interesting word. I sat at my kitchen table listening to the voicemail while peeling potatoes for dinner. Funny how truth suddenly becomes dangerous once enough people hear it out loud. The following Sunday evening it started raining just after dark. Heavy Ohio rain that tapped against windows and flooded gutters within minutes. I had just finished washing dishes when headlights swept across my living room wall. At first I thought somebody had taken a wrong turn into the parking lot. Then I heard a car door slam outside. A few seconds later came a knock at my front door. Slow. Hesitant. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Ethan stood there soaked from the rain despite the expensive black coat clinging to his shoulders. He looked older somehow. Not physically older. Just worn down around the eyes in a way success usually cannot fix. For a moment neither of us spoke. Rainwater dripped from his hair onto the concrete outside my door. Finally he looked down and said quietly, Mom, can we talk? I should tell you I imagined this moment differently many times over the years. I thought if Ethan ever truly understood what he had done, I would feel victorious somehow. Powerful. Vindicated. But standing there looking at my son exhausted beneath porch light shadows, all I felt was sadness. Not dramatic sadness. The quiet kind that settles into your bones after disappointment stretches too long. Ethan stepped inside carefully and glanced around the duplex like he was seeing it clearly for the first time. The worn couch. The old refrigerator humming in the kitchen. The stack of grocery coupons beside my purse. Evidence of a life he had spent years trying to outgrow. I never meant to hurt you, he said finally, his voice cracking slightly. I folded the dish towel slowly in my hands before answering. I know. And I did know. That was the tragedy of it. Ethan had not erased me because he hated me. He erased me because somewhere along the way, he started believing struggle was shameful and survival looked cleaner without witnesses. He sat down quietly at the kitchen table while rain pressed harder against the windows outside. I do not know how to fix this, he admitted. I looked at him for a long moment before speaking. Some things do not break all at once, Ethan, I said softly. And sometimes they do not heal all at once either. He nodded slowly, staring down at his hands like a child again for the first time in years. Later that night after he left, I turned off the kitchen light and stood alone by the window watching his car disappear into the rain. Then I walked to my bedroom and slept peacefully through the night for the first time in a very